President, Person, Council members. Tonight we have a discussion we'd like to present to you on your last Committee of the Whole meeting for the year. And that relates to a lot of the work that's ongoing with respect to the Sunset Community Investment Strategy and a lot of the opportunities. We wanted to do three things. Number one is just bring you up to date with respect to what's going on in the community. Number two is provide information related to the Sunset Area Master Plan, which is a land use permit, as well as the environmental review that the city is performing for that. And then finally, use this as an opportunity to talk about the Choice Neighborhoods investments grant that's through the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level. We have an opportunity to advance a lot of the projects that have been identified in the Sunset Community Investment Strategy. So then we're going to segue after the Sunset area into talking about Lake Washington Boulevard corridor, specifically providing you with a status of the 3 hotel projects that are down there. And then we're going to have a representative from our Public Works Transportation Division talk about the transportation study that was done recently for the Lake Washington Boulevard corridor and how that study will relate to any mitigation related to these 3 projects for hotels that we're reviewing. So that's just a really quick overview, and we're going to start with Raquel Timmons and Mark Santos Johnson here.
Good evening, Council President and members of the Committee of the Whole. For the record, my name is Raquel Timmons, and I am a Senior Planner with the Department of Community and Economic Development, and I am here to provide you the briefing on the Sunset Master Site Plan and CNI grant application. Also with me is Mark Santos Johnson, and he'll actually be doing the CNI grant portion of our presentation today. The outline tonight, we're planning, as Chip mentioned, or Mr. Frizzy mentioned, to provide you a history in the Sunset area, and then kind of narrow the focus to the Sunset Terrace redevelopment area and provide you an overview of upcoming actions related to the master site planning effort that's happening within the planning department, as well as an environmental review that was just completed by the city's environmental review committee, and then also actions that'll be coming before the city council tonight. And then, as I mentioned, Mark Santos Johnson will complete our presentation with the Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant. So just to provide a very, very brief overview of the Sunset area profile. The area is approximately 269 acres, and that includes approximately 3,000 duplex units, which were built on 240 acres of that land. Some of those duplex units, also included in that area is the public housing for Sunset Terrace, and that contained 100 units. The area is located next to highways and transit and has good access to both of those, as well as the area is close to major development, shopping, and entertainment opportunities. The vision for the area is to have this Sunset area be a destination place where neighbors and businesses are engaged. The area is walkable and interconnected. It feels safe and secure. As development and growth occurs, there's a preservation of quality of life. The area becomes a more attractive place to live and do business, and we don't preclude development, or won't preclude those families with different incomes to live there. We want it to be affordable, and we want it to celebrate ethnic diversity. So given the vision, the city initiated planning efforts back in 1999 and carried on those efforts throughout until 2006. And what that really looked like was resident and business outreach. The city created a center village land use designation, and that was to address compact urban development, which would be oriented to transit and pedestrians. Also during this timeline, the city did adopt a multiple building moratoria, and following that, the city did some additional outreach. However, it wasn't until 2007 the city created 2 task forces, Highlands Task Force 1 and 2, and that occurred in 2007, 2008, and that was composed of several different representatives and community stakeholders, and they reviewed those comprehensive planning policies that were within the Center Village land use designation as well as the CV zone. And public involvement in really addressed affordable housing, parks and recreation, public safety, business district improvement, and walkability. And out of those task forces, the council adopted a set of recommendations issued by the public. Those recommendations were used to inform the community investment strategy in 2009. And this investment strategy process also gave the public another opportunity to really engage. And that strategy resulted in 9 investment strategies for the city to pursue on public lands. And all of these efforts culminated in an environmental impact statement in 2010. And the purpose of that environmental impact statement, or the EIS, was to study development proposals and their cumulative environmental impacts in advance of actual individual applications. And it was necessary in order to eliminate the need for additional environmental review as subsequent permits come in. And we also wanted to help facilitate private and public investment in the study area. That EIS in 2010 considered alternatives, impacts, and mitigation specifically for the redevelopment of RHA's Sunset Terrace. It also addressed Sunset Boulevard improvements, a master stormwater drainage plan, as well as general neighborhood redevelopment for both public and private opportunities. And really it resulted in 4 alternatives. First being a no action alternative, the second being a moderate level of growth, the third being the highest level of growth, and out of the final EIS there came a preferred alternative which simulated neighborhood growth similar to or slightly less than alternative 3. And I'm kind of speedballing through this because I've been in presentations all day. So as you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. But there will be time after, or I guess this would be a good time to ask any questions about the history. No? Okay. Also in 2010, the City Council completed a planned action ordinance. Thank you. And as part of that planned action ordinance, it identified all of the potential projects that would occur within the Sunset Area EIS, and those projects that complied with those mitigation measures included in the EIS would not require any additional environmental review, and that was the purpose of the ordinance. Since the time of the Planned Action Ordinance, there have been several projects that have been completed in the area between 2011 and 2014. The first being the Glenwood Townhomes. It was an 8-unit townhome project completed by the Renton Housing Authority for replacement housing for Sunset Terrace. Also completed was the Meadowcrest Early Childhood Learning Center, completed by the Renton School District, as well as the Accessible Playground, which was a partnership between the Renton School District and the City of Renton that we're all excited about. Also completed, just completed, and the grand opening or open house, or I'm not exactly sure how to term that, was just done last week for the Kirkland Townhomes. That's 16 townhome units, 2 and 3 bedrooms, also to be used for replacement housing for the Sunset Terrace. And as you know, the Highlands Library has begun its construction right there on Northeast 10th Street. City has also begun to complete portions of the green connections that have been envisioned in the area. This is to accommodate some of the drainage mitigation that was a part of the EIS completed in 2010. And then finally, the Sunset Master Park Plan has been presented to the council and approved, as well as the Sunset Boulevard design has been initiated, and the city has, from what I understand, hired consultants to begin the design work for the boulevard treatments. Now, focusing in more on the Sunset area or Sunset Terrace sub area. This area is approximately 15-acre site within the larger Sunset area community, And redevelopment of this area envisions Sunset Terrace as a mixed-use, mixed-income community. And that would include a very large park in the center portion of the sub-area, along with a circular road system that facilitates circulation around that park. There would be compatibility with the future SR 900 or Sunset Boulevard improvements. But most importantly, mixed-use development with residential and commercial units are included within this area, as well as the library are envisioned. And so what we're bringing before you today are really what's changed in the subset or in the sub-area since the time of our original EIS. Approximately 90 units would be redirected from the larger Sunset area into the Sunset Terrace sub-area. So as you can see here in Alternative 3, there were a total of 2,500 approximately units envisioned within the entire area, with 479 units in the sub-area. In a reevaluation alternative, or what we'll be bringing before the council, we will maintain the 2,500 units within the larger area. However, 90 of these units have been redirected to the sub-area. And in large part, that will be accomplished by a density transfer that the city is working with the private developer Committe on currently to figure out how we transfer the density around within the area. And we're happy to answer any questions you have about that. Building heights also in the area would be increased by no more than 10 feet above what was currently or considered prior within the original EIS. We will also be reducing building setbacks from the future Sunset Boulevard. Also included in the revisions is an expanded park to approximately 3.2 acres, where what was originally considered was either a half an acre park up to a maximum of a 2.5 acre park. So the park area has now expanded. And then finally, the revised improvements include the reclassification of local streets serving the area, and we wanted to address a more efficient roadway cross-section, and that specifically speaks to the Sunset Lane Loop Road, which borders the park. We have a more efficient cross-section for this area, and we are also working right now to identify an appropriate timeline for improvements, which may include the city creating a special assessment district or a latecomers agreement where we would construct the road section first and then have developers come back in and pay back into a system for those improvements that the city has already completed. So when considering all of these changes, staff found it important to do this in a very coordinated way. We thought that a master site planning effort would be the most appropriate method to do this. It would streamline the land use permitting process. It would also enable us to be more competitive for the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant, which Mr. Santos Johnson will speak to in just a second. It would reflect the revisions made for individual proposals and facilitate the preparation of phased site plans over time. It would allow the city to request the additional height through a conditional use permit application, and then we would also be providing more certainty for members of the public and private developers. I've just taken this slide to provide the committee with a preliminary project schedule. I can go over it in detail. Otherwise, I would continue on unless you had questions about the schedule. But essentially, the projects within the sub-area span between now and a completion in 2018, depending on funding. So what you'll notice in this slide is RHA's housing projects, which are close to the bottom of the table, are all dependent upon financing, and so they're not included in the construction timeline. But the library and the drainage facility will likely be completed in this year, and the market rate housing will begin in 2015. I said this year, I meant 2015. But the market rate housing, also known as Committe's Sunset Terrace development, would begin construction in 2015 and would likely wrap up their phase in 2016, and subsequent phases would occur annually thereafter. So their phase 2, noted as Site 7 and 8, would complete in late 2017, and their third phase, Site 6 and 7, would complete in 2018. And as I said, I've sped pretty fast through this. Does this committee have any questions? No?
Yeah, Marcy?
Where's the park? Oh, Sunset Park, okay.
The park is in the center, and so Sunset Park, and this would also be dependent on funding. The city is currently pursuing money at the moment, and we'll find out soon whether or not we've been awarded. So should we be awarded, it would be enough to begin the first phase of construction on the park, and that would be completed in early 2017.
And the city is doing that?
Correct.
Okay, not coal pits or, okay. And then why was the setbacks decreased and for those facing Sunset Boulevard?
So that's actually a really great question. So this in large part is to provide as much space for the park as possible. So Sunset Boulevard requires a certain amount of width for improvements that the EIS envisioned, and that required the shift of this outer brow of lots to the north. And so the minimum width needed to accommodate 2 tiers of parking for structured parking for these buildings requires about 125 lot width. And we have essentially limited the width of those lots to 130 feet, which would not allow for much setback from Sunset Boulevard. But that was primarily in an effort to allow as much space as possible for the park area.
Okay.
So if these lots were any wider, let's say 140 feet to accommodate a 10-foot setback, that would obviously push that northern property line into the park and reduce the space for the park.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Really good question. So we do have some conceptual elevations for the market rate housing. This is very conceptual at the moment, and staff is really working with the applicant to comply with design standards. And so while we'll be going through a master site planning effort at the moment, that's really supposed to be at a conceptual level. We will get down into the weeds of design and detail when they come in for their individual applications for each phase, but they have provided conceptual elevations here. And then this is a massing diagram for the public housing for Renton Housing Authority. And it just shows building envelopes for the Sunset Court Park area and the Edmonds site. The buildings will not maximize these building envelopes. This is mainly a diagram to demonstrate how tall the buildings could potentially be. But the buildings will still be required to comply with setbacks and lot coverage requirements, which would significantly reduce these masses. In terms of approvals requested, right now, changes to the Sunset Terrace redevelopment sub-area would require the environmental review to do a reevaluation of the NEPA that was completed in 2010, as well as the SEPA that was completed in 2010. That was actually accomplished earlier today, 2 hours ago, by the Environmental Review Committee. And from what I understand, they have signed off on the adoption of all the documents needed for environmental review. Next would be planned amendments for the planned action ordinance, and that will actually come before the full council tonight, and I'll be doing a presentation for the public hearing for those amendments. And then once that's approved, should you approve the amendments to the planned action ordinance, staff will go before the city's hearing examiner to provide a presentation on the master site plan approval as well as the conditional use permit for height. And that's all I have for the master site planning process. And before Mark starts on the C&I grant portion, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Questions?
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm here to talk about an opportunity that the city has with a number of our partners to proceed with a grant application for a Choice Neighborhoods Initiative implementation grant for the Sunset area. Specifically, this is an opportunity that HUD, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development, provides They just came out with a NOFA in early November, and the applications are due in February. If successful, we have the potential to secure up to $30 million to help with our Sunset area revitalization efforts. Choice neighborhoods were developed under the Obama administration to help struggling neighborhoods that have distressed public housing be able to access these funds to provide a comprehensive neighborhood transformation. And as you know, Sunset Terrace is a 100-unit public housing project that was built in 1959 by the Renton Housing Authority. It is distressed housing, and it was the highest priority community investment strategy adopted by the city in 2009. So these funds would be quite helpful for us in supporting RHA's Sunset Terrace redevelopment. Specifically, the funds could potentially allow up to $30 million that would be broken into primarily 3 areas. The majority of the funds have to be used for housing to support RHA's redevelopment of Sunset Terrace. But in addition to that, there would be potentially up to $3.75 million each to be used for neighborhood improvements as well as for people improvements, and then 5% of the total funds would be available for administration. The Choice Neighborhood Implementation, the CNI funds are quite competitive. It's a national campaign. Typically, most of the recipients are from large cities. Seattle received one for their Yester Terrace project, but they also encourage the city of Renton to apply because they think that we've done a lot of good things here and that we have a strong case to be made. There currently are $75 million available in the fiscal year 2014 budget, and there will be additional funds available in the 2015 fiscal year budget for Choice Neighborhoods. As you know, the Sunset area has a number of significant community needs. 27% of the households live in poverty. Violent crime is 2.5 times higher than the city as a whole, and home ownership is significantly lower than the rest of the city. However, there are a number of assets in the Sunset area as well. There are significant public investments by the city, the school district, and the housing authority. We together have created a shared vision, a commitment, and a successful collaborative partnership to create changes in that neighborhood. Raquel noted a number of the different strategies and reports and plans that we've adopted over the years, but they lay a solid foundation for us moving forward with the CNI grant. In addition, as Raquel noted, there are significant projects that have been completed and a number of other very substantial projects that are in progress, all of which provide a substantial framework for us to compete for these funds. We have put together a team of partners, augmenting the folks locally who have been working on this effort. We have engaged the King County Housing Authority to be our lead applicant and our housing lead. We've engaged Neighborhood House to be our people lead, and again are working with RHA, the school district, and the technical college. This is a graph of the grant structure that we propose. It just shows the variety of different elements and the people who are involved in that. It's significant that we are engaged with the King County Housing Authority. As you know, they have projects that are located here in Renton. They're currently building the Vantage Point Apartments in the Benson community. More significantly, they have had 2 large HUD Hope 6 projects that they've done in the White Center area, Greenbridge and Ciola Gardens, which were both quite successful. And HUD scores their projects based on past experience, and so they will score significantly higher than we would without them. We also have engaged Deborah Gooden, who managed both of those Hope 6 projects for the King County Housing Authority. She retired earlier this year, and we brought her back as a contract grant writer to help us with our efforts, and she's been invaluable. Essentially, the Choice Neighborhood Funds require a community to create a transformation plan. We have done a number of things to address a variety of different needs in the community, but it really challenges us to go a step further to try and address additional needs in the community that will provide more transformative elements for the residents there. We're still developing our plan for the application, but we anticipate that elements will include not only the new affordable and mixed income housing, but potentially some improvements for the substandard World War II era housing in the area, enhanced education programs, increased early learning services, expanded health and human services, crime prevention strategies, and improved access to jobs. As you can see, a number of these things build on many of the other elements that we've planned in the area to date. The core of this, since it is a HUD housing project, is the Sunset Terrace redevelopment. And you may have noticed in Raquel's earlier chart where she showed all of RHA's remaining projects down at the bottom with no timeline secured, and their ability to move forward dependent on raising additional funds. If we received a Choice Neighborhood Fund application, they would be able to complete their remaining Sunset Terrace redevelopment projects in 5 years, rather than the 15 to 20 it's likely to take if we continue to go after county and state funds every 2 to 3 years as they are able. So this would substantially accelerate their redevelopment and allow us to progress with our revitalization for the area. For the neighborhood and the people elements, we're relying on a number of data sources to help identify priority needs. There was the Sunset Area Community Needs Assessment that was done as part of the Renton Community Needs Assessment. As well, earlier this year, the Renton Housing Authority did a resident survey of their Sunset Terrace residents, and the school district has a data sharing agreement with Neighborhood House to provide us with information regarding the student needs for students in the Sunset area. We're also working with multiple departments here at the city, with our other partners and other interested parties to identify potential neighborhood improvements and people elements that would enhance our application, better meet the needs of residents in the community as well as the Sunset Terrace residents, and provide us with more leverage for our grant application. This is a challenge. I don't want to in any way misstate that. There's a limited amount of money available. It's a competitive scoring. The more leverage you have and the better partnerships you have, the higher your score and you're more likely to win. And it's a very short period of time. We have 2 months left to complete this application. And unfortunately, although it's $30 million, we still have far more Sunset area needs and opportunities than the funds or time allow. But this would significantly allow us to meet our housing needs for RHA, and then also promote a substantial number of neighborhood and people investments. Conversely, there are significant benefits to a Choice Neighborhood application. The first one is because HUD has combined 2 fiscal years into one application round, we will be eligible for not only the current $75 million, but the additional funds that would be available in the second fiscal year from one application. On the other hand, if we don't apply now, we're not eligible for anything for at least 2 years. If we're successful, we are likely to leverage $75 million or more from other sources to support Sunset area community revitalization. So experience of the Seattle Housing Authority and the King County Housing Authority is that when projects have secured these dollars, that they've been able to substantially leverage other investment from folks who want to get involved. And then most importantly, to remember that this grant would build upon and advance the collaborative efforts to date of the city and all our partners as we continue to work to support a vibrant and highly livable community in the Sunset area. We plan to come back to the council next month. At the time, we'd like to ask you to adopt a resolution for our participation in this Choice Neighborhood application along with our partners. And I think it's significant to note that there are multiple staff, both here at the city, at the Renton Housing Authority, the King County Housing Authority, the school district, and the neighborhood house, all working together to try and create a successful Choice Neighborhood application. It's about a 9-month process once the applications are submitted, and we expect that they'll make announcements of their award recipients next fall. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions? No questions.
Good luck.
Good presentation, and
Yeah.
well, if we can only really hope we get that grant, because that'll
Wonderful.
start us going.
I have a question.
Oh, just a second.
Will you be making a presentation to the school board and the trustees at RHA?
Each of those entities will be addressing their own governing entities as they see appropriate. Each of them will have to make some type of a resolution to participate. The Renton Housing Authority had a board meeting earlier today, and they acted on part of this. The school district will be doing the same, as well as the King County Housing Authority. So each entity will need to sign a variety of certifications. It's about a 225-page application, and a lot of certifications and other attachments. And so each entity will need to go through the process to participate fully.
Okay, wow, wow.
How many of these grants are awarded? Do you have an approximation? I mean, is it?
Well, there's $75 million available, and the most you can get is $30 million. So the most they're likely to fund is 3 projects in the first round. They could potentially fund as many as 3 to 5 in the next round. And so depending on what money is available, there could be anywhere from 3 to 8 projects funded this year. Traditionally, they've funded 3 or 4 projects. It's unclear whether or not the Choice Neighborhoods initiative would be continued in the future, depending on what happens with federal elections. So this is an excellent opportunity for us, and we don't know if there'll be another future opportunity.
Wow.
And that's nationwide that we're
This is
talking?
nationwide, but it's important to remember that the Seattle Housing Authority did receive one of these, and the King County Housing Authority is highly regarded. They are working with us to try to put together a competitive application so that we have the benefits of moving forward with this resource.
Okay. Anybody else?
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
You can do it.
Oh, we're trying to do it together.
Okay, is it Chip up next, or,
Raquel's going to.
Raquel is?
Raquel is gonna tee it up here, and we're waiting for Doug Jacobson is gonna join us too.
Yeah.
But we will start right in with a briefing on the Lake Washington Boulevard hotel projects. And Doug will join us shortly to share with you the work that's been done looking at a transportation study for that same corridor.
I think Doug just walked in. Thank you. So our goals tonight for this particular presentation is to provide the council with an update on current hotel projects along the Lake Washington Boulevard, but specifically at Exit 5. We are hoping to prepare you for your comprehensive plan update discussion for the land use element and transportation element at this location. So specifically the Urban Center North designation and zone, as well as the level of service for the city and Lake Washington Boulevard for transportation. This outline is structured in a way where we'll present a brief description on the current projects located along Lake Washington at Exit 5, and that would include the Southport Hotel, the Hampton Inn, and or also known as the Legacy Inn Hotel, and the Residence Inn Hotel. I will provide a brief discussion on the evolution of these proposals to address aesthetic impacts, and then Doug Jacobson is here to present information on transportation impacts resulting from the hotels. And then finally Chip will come up and have a discussion with you on the next steps for the council related to these projects and your comprehensive plan update. So the Southport Hotel is a 350-room hotel. It's approximately 12 stories, or it is 12 stories. There are 487 parking stalls that are located in a surface parking lot just south of the hotel. So you have Lake Washington to the north, the hotel depicted here in yellow, and then the 487 parking stalls to the south. The hotel includes a 40,000 square foot convention space as well as a 10,000 square foot restaurant. I do want to mention that there is a phase 3 that has been approved on this site for office development. It includes 3 office buildings at also 12 stories. and they would be located within this surface parking area. At the time that they are constructed, it is envisioned that structured parking stalls would be provided as part of the office buildings to support both the hotel as well as the offices. And here I just have a conceptual elevation of the Southport Hotel as viewed from Lake Washington. And to provide you a brief timeline, the application was actually approved in 2000. The environmental review and the master land use application was approved in 2000. Most recently, however, the applicant and developer has come in for site plan approval, and that was approved in September of this year. Also approved in September was the grading permit application, and construction commenced in October. So if you go out there now, the site's been graded and they're out there drilling and trying to stabilize the soils to support the hotel. We are expecting a formal building permit application for the podium portion of the building with a later submittal for the structural portion of the hotel. But that first building permit is expected to come in this year, so within the next couple of weeks, we'll receive a formal building permit application for the hotel.
Raquel?
Yes.
My understanding on the grading permit that they're putting in is that they had a couple choices on how they were going to stabilize
Stabilize the site.
the scene of the site, but they took the more expensive and better. And I don't understand. I'm not an engineer, so I don't quite understand it, but
And I'm not either, but I can do my best to explain. They are actually proposing, there was two choices to stabilize the site, and the more expensive choice was a proposal that included geopiers. So this is where they would, from what I understand, do drills down into the grade, approximately 50 feet in depth. There would be 2,000 of these holes,
Wow.
which would then be backfilled with a stabilizing material that would then support the podium to go on top. So it's a fairly substantial process. It will take several months to complete, and they are out there doing that right now.
in my understanding, that's about $1 million more in cost than what the traditional would be.
I can't speak to that.
Anyway, that's what I heard.
Okay. It is expected that complete construction would be done in 2017 at some point. For the Legacy Inn, also known as the Hampton Inn project, and I have an arrow depicted, so this is there's two lots right adjacent or abutting one another on the east side of Lake Washington Boulevard, in between I-405 and Lake Washington Boulevard. And the northern lot, and this is where the espresso stand is currently located, would be the site for the Legacy Inn, also known as the Hampton Inn Hotel. The site is approximately 1.25 acres. It is zoned Urban Center North 2. The proposal currently includes 105 rooms. It is approximately 5 stories. There would be 96 structured parking stalls, and there are very minimal impacts to slopes, and impervious surface and building coverage has also been kept to a minimum. Now, I will caution this to let you know that this has been an evolution in terms of process to come to this ultimate design, and I'll speak to that evolution from the original design to what you have here today.
Just a second, Marcy?
So here we go again with the parking.
God, that was the exact same question I was gonna ask.
105 rooms, not 105 parking spaces. How many employees are we anticipating?
We don't actually have a formal application in just yet. I was going to speak to the timeline. Right now, as this sits, and based on the presentation that we had before the Planning and Development Committee, we understand there to be concerns related to parking. Those are concerns that we are planning on addressing as part of the land use application. At this point, this is just a conceptual proposal that staff will be reviewing in further detail as part of the land use process.
I'd really like to know the number, approximate, of employees for both these hotels, because both these hotels don't have enough parking for the rooms, and I don't know where their people are going to park, at the park, at Coolon,
And we
at
would
Fry's,
definitely get you that
along Hauser?
information.
Mr. President? Oh, yeah.
Ed's next, and then Randy.
And so maybe this is a question for Chip, so that Raquel can get off the firing squad for a second.
I'm not mad at you. It's okay.
Do we, when we have hotels come into the city, and I understand we haven't had any in a while, do we have anything where we say you have to have enough parking, not only for your beds, but
Yeah.
for your employees?
Yeah, and we have very specific requirements based on the type of use, this being a hotel, for how many parking spaces you have to have per room as well as to accommodate employees. We just aren't at that point in the process yet where we would be evaluating. Presentation is more on the conceptual level.
Understood.
We will ensure when they submit their application and we review it, that they meet all the prescriptive requirements of the code, including having the absolute minimum required number of parking stalls.
So is that a formula, or is that just a policy, or?
No, it's a specific requirement in the code,
Okay.
based on number of rooms and number of employees.
Okay.
It's one per room and one for every 3 employees. That's
Perfect.
what is
That
prescribed
was
in the
going to
code.
be my next question. Thank you.
Yes.
Randy?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that I think sometimes when the developers come in and they tell us the number of structured parking, they're basically just, because that's part of the structure they're going to build, and so I presume there would be some surface parking in addition.
Very little.
Yeah, it sounds like not very much on this site, but you know, I obviously share the concern, but that's probably the answer.
I also wanted to just provide you a depiction of the massing diagrams that have been conceptualized to date. As Chip mentioned, the project is still in its conceptual phases, so this is a kind of plain white 3D diagram. It doesn't actually show the colors that are going to be used or the glazing that will occur, the windows on the hotel, or the materials that will actually be used. But it does give you some concept for its relationship to the neighboring townhome mixed-use development to the north that was constructed by Matt Poole, as well as to the slope that's right up adjacent to the east, or abutting the site to the east. And so you can see the relationship of the building and how it fits into the natural and built environment.
I got another question.
Sure.
Where do they anticipate this is a lot of rooms all of a sudden. Where do they anticipate the people that are going to be filling those rooms are going to come from? Any idea? Just because of Boeing, or?
In terms of travel, or just in general, like who will actually
who
purchase
would
the
be?
rooms?
There must be a market. They must feel there's a market.
Yeah, I don't know if someone saw the same study. A couple of different hotel groups saw the same study and identified this to be a logical location for hotels. But it's obvious that there's something out there that says that there's a need for rooms, whether it be Boeing or proximity to the freeways, or the location in between SeaTac and the city of Bellevue. It has, and also proximity to the landing and the amenities there and the regional park across the street. So I haven't seen anything personally. Chip, have you seen anything?
No, but we have received information from different hotel operators within the city that there is a pent-up demand and need for additional hotel room space within the city of Renton. Their occupancy levels were at the highest this last year than they've seen in quite a long period of time. And this is interesting given 2 factors. Number 1, the increase in the rate of production with Boeing, and 2, the fact that they all want to be geographically approximate to the location of Boeing are 2 things that go hand in hand with furthering that case as well.
Thank you.
So in terms of a project timeline for Legacy, so that you have a better idea about when we're actually going to begin review, there was a master land use application, environmental review application completed in January of 2014, so January of this year, but we placed that project on hold in February. We required that the applicant provide us some additional information, one of those being a secondary transportation study, which I'm sure Doug will speak to maybe a little bit, as well as a secondary study for the soils on site and potential impacts to soils. But also, we really wanted them to address some of the concerns we heard with respect to aesthetics, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a second. However, we are anticipating that they will reapply. The applicant will reapply this year prior to the end of the year with a formal land use application. And we, the city, will begin our land use review and environmental review on that application, which should occur and be completed within the beginning of 2015, so first quarter of 2015. We are also expecting a formal building permit application from the applicant in early 2015 with an expected construction completion in late 2016. So some of the details related to parking and the fine-tuning of the site design would be reviewed during their formal land use application, which is upcoming. So things like parking, we would look at that time and condition the proposal to make sure that they comply with the code requirements for parking and all other standards listed in code. Now, the Residence Inn is very conceptual at this point, so we are continually working with the Residence Inn as they evolve their project to better comply with our codes and policies. But right now, as it sits, it's a 2.86 acre site, also zoned UCN2. It's the southern site, also formerly owned by Puget Western. And currently proposed on this site is a 145-room hotel. It's right now proposed at 6 stories. It includes your concern for parking, 116 structured parking and surface stalls. There are right now moderate slope impacts proposed, as well as a moderate impervious surface and building coverage. And we do have some concepts here provided by the applicant. Again, these are very, very conceptual. They have not fine-tuned their application to even submit yet and actually be reviewed by the city. What's occurred to date, there was a pre-application earlier this year in October, and we are expecting an application, but this is preliminary right now in its stage. So I do want to mention, given the retreat last year done by the council and your concerns related to aesthetic impacts along Lake Washington Boulevard and the fit of the hotels within the context of the built and natural environment, we have worked really, really hard as staff with the applicant to achieve a design that we believe best complies with the existing codes that are within the existing codes of for the city today. And so some of the things we worked on with the applicant were orientation, so the orientation to the lake and the regional park that's just across the street. As you can see, this depiction, this picture here is actually the first iteration of the Legacy Hampton Inn, and it has substantially changed, and I'll go through those steps in just a second. But this was the first iteration, and it kind of turned its back on the lake and the park. And so we worked really hard with the applicant to achieve an orientation that really took advantage of the fact that there's these natural amenities right across Lake Washington Boulevard. We were also really concerned about the mass and bulk right up along Lake Washington. As you can see, this is a very substantial building. It doesn't take in consideration the built environment around it or the fact that Lake Washington Boulevard is not an arterial street and wouldn't support such a massive building right up adjacent to the street. Finally, we wanted to work with the applicant because this first iteration doesn't really have any kind of pedestrian scale. There's no amenities that pull your eye to the ground. It's just a massive kind of hospital-like building. So we really worked with the applicant to achieve a better design. So this slide depicts the steps that staff went through with the applicant to achieve the design we have today. So the first design that you see in October of 2014 was a 130-room hotel. It included structured parking, but it was 6 stories. And I should note that this red line that you see across these 3 different slides depicts the height of the adjacent or neighboring townhome mixed-use development. And as you can see, the proposed hotel exceeds that line by a story. Also, what should be noted is the slope that's right east of the site is also depicted in these graphics, and the proposed hotel in the first iteration was well above that existing slope and could be seen by travelers on 405. We worked with the applicant, and we provided them some ideas that maybe could potentially mitigate our concerns for orientation, massing, as well as pedestrian scale. And their second design scheme that came back in November, early November, included a step back on the upper story, but the structure was still up above that bright line, that red line. And it was really out of context with the built environment. We thought there was a little bit more that could be achieved. And while they had reduced the number of rooms from 130 to 125 rooms, it was still a 6-story structure. This final design does a couple of things. One, it reduces the top story. Building goes now from 6 stories to 5 stories. It still includes that setback, so that 5th story doesn't have the presence up along Lake Washington. And so it appears as a 4-story hotel up along Lake Washington as opposed to a 5-story hotel. It stays right up under that bright line, which is in context with that neighboring townhome project right next door. It also is beneath the slope that's to the east of the site between the building and I-405. Also, what's important to note here is an additional setback of 22 feet from the property line. So where these building setbacks are about 15 feet, there's an additional 7 feet that's been included in the project design to provide that spacing for additional pedestrian amenities and plaza spaces. We've heard that the applicant is considering outdoor dining areas to really provide that active space up along Lake Washington Boulevard that you would want for this character of street. And then finally, and I didn't bring a lot of attention to it, but all of these iterations, as opposed to the original iteration, include structured parking below grade. The first design did not have structured parking, and if you look in this lower corner picture, you'll see that there was a large structured parking area within the slope, and this was going to be an 80-foot tall structured parking area. So we really worked with the applicant to get them to put that parking underground. It's a lot more expensive, but it allowed them to reduce substantially the building cover on the site, impacts the slopes, as well as provide some relief for aesthetics. Any questions
Any questions?
about aesthetics?
Thank you.
Good evening. Let's see. Early last summer, we began to be concerned about the cumulative effect of all of the different developments at the south end and the north end of Lake Washington Boulevard, and what the cumulative impact of those developments might be. And so we retained the consulting firm that historically the last few years has been the same firm that is updated and kept current the city's transportation model for the entire city, gave them the information, the preliminary information, the traffic studies, any of the impact statements that have been done on 6 different developments from exit 7 to the north to exit 5 down here to the south. We asked them to evaluate the level of service at 12 different intersections, not only those on Lake Washington Boulevard, but several intersections on 30th and the north 30th on and off ramps to 405. We used year 2035 as a background a year to make these projections, knowing that several of these developments may not materialize for 10 years, and we wanted to make sure we captured what future impacts would be. So before we started analyzing the impacts of the particular developments, we took the existing traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard and those intersections, and we added 20 years of background traffic. If none of these projects were to happen, but we all know the area is growing, we looked at what would the traffic be in 2035. We also took a conservative approach and doing this, we put the rose-colored glasses in the desk and didn't take them out. We said, what would those traffic projections be? What would the condition be if the improvements were never made on 405? So those were the two baselines we looked at, which
good
we
assumption.
considered would be, conservative, and it can only get better from here. We then based on the 3 hotel projects, all of it was looking at PM peak hour traffic. Some of the traffic studies, most of the major traffic studies have had their individual traffic study reviewed by a peer, a second traffic engineering firm employed by the city to review, give an independent look at those studies. And the basis for all the projections is, this is volume 2 of 3, but it is the trip generation manual. It's a Institute of Transportation Engineers document that has been around for years. This is the 8th edition. The 9th edition is what actually is used, but what it's based on is year after year after year after year of traffic counts and studies as to how much different types of land uses generate.
Okay, Doug, we have a question from Ed.
So, Doug, PM peak, no AM peak? Is there a
PM
reason for
peak
that?
the PM peak we looked at is because it is the period in Renton where congestion overall is worst.
Okay.
That's why we look at PM peak traffic. And so this here summarizes, based on the information we had, the hotel at Southport during the PM peak hour will have 109 cars coming in, 104 cars going out. Each of the smaller hotels will, 38 and 37, although the numbers I just saw this evening were back when the hotel was like 125, that's now 105. So as the planning department works with them, their proposals seem to shrink a little, which is good when you're looking at the traffic from the original larger one.
Sorry, Doug, I hate to keep belaboring this, because I keep thinking about people who live in that neighborhood who are having a hard time getting out of it to get to work or get their kids to school. Is there any value in doing an AM peak study?
Yes, and I'll follow up with a memorandum as to why PM peak is chosen and what the difference might be.
From somebody that lives there, the morning appears to be much worse than the afternoon currently.
If you're trying to get on 405 going north. But when you look at the intersections, particularly at the south at the south end of the corridor, a lot of the impact, particularly at Garden and Logan, is traffic more that's going south through the city, not going to 405.
In the afternoon, you're saying?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And so, but we'll follow up to make sure that gets addressed.
I appreciate that, thanks.
So we looked at 2 intersections. One was the current 4-way stop at which we call the South Coulon Park intersection, the road that goes into the south end of the park and also goes to Southport. It would be operating at a level of service D based on those 2035 background volumes. The Southport Hotel is been conditioned to have to signalize that intersection. In fact, they've actually started the work to signalize that intersection, improve the railroad crossing, and signalize the intersection where the road tees and goes to the park and Southport. And they want to have that signal operating hopefully by next summer when their construction activity is really ramped up, because they see the signal facilitating them getting their construction materials in and out of the project site. After the
No, just,
intersection is signalized, after the Southport Hotel traffic is using that intersection, you'll be at a level of service C, and it remains at level of service C even with the additional traffic of the two smaller hotels. One of the things to remember when you have a signalized intersection, and your level of service is based on your average delay time, the amount of time a car has to wait. And once you've signalized an intersection, there's kind of a baseline of 30-35 seconds to the average vehicle, just because not very many vehicles happen to drive up to the signal when it's green. And so almost everyone is stopping. And so when you have a little more traffic, you have a few more cars in line waiting for the signal to turn green. But the traffic we're seeing here is a case where, in almost all circumstances, the traffic will clear in one cycle of the signal. Then going farther south to Lake Washington Boulevard and Garden Avenue, it basically operates at level of service D, both with background traffic, with the additional traffic from Southport and the two smaller hotels. One thing to remember here is a lot of the traffic that's coming out of those hotels is also going north and south. So you don't have all the traffic that's going through the intersection at Southport or the South Coulon Park intersection. Not all that traffic goes through Lake Washington Boulevard and Garden, because some of it is turned to go north or has come from the north. And that the one thing to note, and there's a memo that I don't know if you've gotten yet, because it just got finalized and sent out last week, that summarizes this analysis for all of the developments and all of the intersections. There probably is concern about these two signals if the surface parking lot for the hotel ever contained several office buildings. And so, maybe to answer a question that someone's about to ask, it's a conclusion of this study that if there was significant office development at the Southport site, the Southport site needs a second point of ingress and egress.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Do we have any community benefit agreement requirements built into the permit process?
Community benefit?
Community benefit agreements. I've brought this before you several times. Community benefits, meaning that when we are working with developers for the benefit of our communities, because of the impact to the communities, we are in a position where we can leverage the possibility of getting these developers to provide, first and foremost, to engage with community members, groups, etc. I think Chip remembers me bringing this up. We had a discussion about it, and therefore negotiating some types of benefits to the community outside of just the business that they bring into the community. For example, living wage jobs, hiring people within the community, those types of things. I'm just curious if we've got anything like that built into our permit process. I see that several of these projects are still in the permitting process, so I know it may not apply to these if it's not there, but is that something that we're planning on doing or thinking about doing?
No, we don't have community benefit agreements specifically outlined that provide staff the authority to provide for mitigation outside of the mitigation that's typically done as part of the SEPA environmental review process. But that's one of those policy choices for the council if they want to identify means by which staff are empowered to identify mitigation for developments. That's something that could be considered as part of a separate process.
Chip? Isn't, maybe it's more for Larry, aren't we limited by state law on some of the mitigation that we can ask? I mean, and the reason I ask this question is because when I was working, they're building these buildings, and we thought that they should be able to mitigate for law enforcement, and they said, we were always told no because it was precluded by state law.
There are fairly substantial limitations on the city's authority. Particularly, to use an example, if you were going to convert a structure that had low-income housing in it, and you required the developer to pay into a fund to provide low-income housing elsewhere, the Supreme Court has held that that is a citywide need that could not be mitigated on the basis of the individual developer. That's just one example. So we'd have to go about it very carefully and make sure that it was not it would have to be a need that was created by the individual development rather than being an existing need or a need that was created over time in the community in general.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And that is accurate. There are ways that it can be done that don't require developers to do specific things that exceeds the authority of local jurisdictions. But there are other ways that it can be accomplished through incentives, and I can offer some boilerplate examples of policies that are in place around the country where they are doing these things and they do conform with state, federal, and local laws.
We must be careful because Washington is one of the more restrictive states with respect to what can be done to mitigate. So maybe we can, with examples, if that's the council's direction, sometime for us to explore that, we could certainly look into the elements of plans elsewhere and see if we can have them conform to state law. That's a policy decision for the council.
And typically with any kind of mitigation, you're looking for two things: nexus and proportionality, that there's a relationship between the development and the action that's happened, and the mitigation is proportionate to the impact that's being created. So typically within anything that's, and I'll use these hotels as an example, anything that's allowed outright pursuant to the zoning, typically you're simply looking at those environmental impacts that are specifically identified under SEPA for any mitigation, not anything outside of that, as the example you gave initially, Councilmember Taylor. However, there are two other ways that, examples that I've seen. Number one is when a developer comes in and applies what's called a planned urban development, a PUD, within the city. There has to be some public benefit associated with a PUD whereby the developer is asking for an exemption or a relief from some of the rules, but there's some public benefit that's being provided that provides a counterbalance to that. And that's why PUDs or planned urban developments go before the city hearing examiner. It's really a policy choice about whether or not the relief that's being asked for is being balanced by public benefit that the developer is providing. And that can be fairly subjective, and we don't do that many PUDs. And the final option is where I've seen public benefits negotiated is when developers have come in and asked for increases in zoning potential. And city has said, well, let's look at this in a holistic manner. How much affordable housing are you willing to offer as part of your project, as an example, for an increase in what the existing zoning that would be authorized. Typically, those are done through development agreements, though, and the framework's established by what the zoning code authorizes the city to do. So anyway, that's just not close to what you're talking about, but some examples that I've observed in this community and other communities that get at some of those mitigation issues associated with projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Randy?
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope in all this, it doesn't get lost, that I think it will create, I know these hotels will create jobs. They probably will reduce some traffic in some ways. I imagine people that lodge in these hotels will often have business or recreation that they're doing in town, and so you know, if they could lodge in Bellevue or SeaTac and then drive to town, but it's still an impact. So I think overall,
Good point.
yeah, I think it's going to be nice if they're done correctly and if we can manage the traffic correctly. One thing I did want to ask about is if we are paying attention to how much right-of-way we have and how much is preserved. With one lane each direction on Lake Washington, that at least that segment right in front of Coolon, it would be nice to know that we're not building such that we couldn't widen it if we had to, at least that little stretch.
Yeah. Yes, and that is the case. In fact, we're looking at public right-of-way needs as part of these projects.
Okay, good.
Moving forward.
Each project requires dedication to widen the road in order to support one, additional queuing for the new signalized intersection, but also we, as staff, have been considering additional right turning lanes into each of the developments.
And I was thinking a little more about the parking. I share my colleagues' concerns that we need to make sure we have adequate parking. But one thing I guess as I thought about it, I've stayed in hotels a lot. I've done a lot of travel, but is if there really are hotels, they'll have, I presume, shuttle service to the airport, and people will take taxis, and it's not quite like a motel where there's a car for every room necessarily. Sometimes I know I've done a lot of business travel where two of us are traveling and we share a car but have separate rooms and things like that. So I guess we'd presumably use formulas and look at the type of hotel and how much of that's going to be happening, I hope.
Well, the applicant always has the ability to turn in what's called a transportation parking study, where they're allowed the opportunity to make their case based on their business model, who their clients are going to be, if they don't believe they should be required to meet the prescriptive requirements of the code. So we start with the code first, and then they have the ability to come in and make a case, which will be reviewed as part of the project.
And then I got one follow-up. So, sometimes I hear rumors and myths about this, but we wouldn't stop them from putting extra parking beyond our standard, would we, or would we?
Well, we typically have both a minimum and a maximum for parking. So yeah, that's.
But suppose their study came in and it said they needed a lot of parking, and then they found a way to do it. Could they, if they thought that what they needed exceeded our maximum, could we know about it at least so that we could?
That transportation parking study I referenced, that case can be made for going above the parking standard.
Okay, good.
Well,
Okay, it can.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
We have prescriptive standards. We've reviewed our parking standards a couple times, worked closely with King County and a lot of other jurisdictions trying to what we call right size our parking requirements for the city. But at the end of the day, there are different unique businesses out there that have different unique parking needs, either more than or less than the code required. That's why we have that provision in the code that allows them to prepare the study, allow us to review what their estimates are, and be able to make a more informed decision on a case-by-case basis.
So my final comment on this would be that, that I in general, my philosophy would be to not try and limit, parking. I mean, it's okay if we want to have a maximum and have them do a study to exceed that, but I'd sure be open-minded if, to having that. In fact, I think that part of town is rapidly going to not have enough parking. I mean, already, as we get close to the holidays, I think we're all realizing that you would go down to the landing and can't find a spot anywhere sometimes. And so we don't want to worsen that. At the same time, I guess I would give a lot of importance to what their engineers for these hotel companies say they need. So.
And can I offer, Chip? Can I offer that the Southport Hotel is actually overparked, and they did request a parking modification to increase the number of parking stalls. So the slide you have before you actually depicts 487 parking stalls for 350 rooms. So there are substantial additional parking stalls to
Why I
support some
didn't
of
give
those
you a hard
needs.
time about that in committee on that.
Well, I'm glad, and actually, especially if there's any kind of a convention element, then it probably really
And
is
employees.
important. And employees. There are going to be a lot of employees.
Well, and I think the point you made, Randy, about it being, lack of parking, I think that when we heard about this in committee, that was our biggest concern is,
Traffic.
and traffic, but especially what if they start parking at Coulon or
Right.
what, you know?
Right.
I mean, there's
That's true, there's a big lot across the street.
across the street.
No, yeah,
And
that's
so
true.
then what if our residents can't
Yeah,
enjoy
that's a
Coulon?
good point.
Because there's not enough
Yeah,
parking.
yeah, thank you for thinking of that, right.
The last thing I would like to emphasize and share with you, as Raquel stated, is we have worked really hard since last February with these developers to ensure that these hotels are the kind of quality projects that add value and character to our community and don't detract from it. We pushed real hard. Getting a developer to lose one floor of a hotel, reduce the number of rooms by almost 30, was a significant effort. To go to structured parking as well. So I wanted to assure the council that we are doing all we can to make sure these are projects that you as a council and we as a community are proud of when they're done. But we're working within a set of rules and laws in terms of the work that we've been able to achieve to date. I would be remiss if I didn't point out to you that the council has different authority outside of the rules in terms of establishing what the policies are for the city with respect to zoning, with respect to design standards. The council just this last year has adopted rules establishing a moratorium on multifamily development, interim zoning rules for the R8 zone as examples of your authority to be able to influence and affect and preserve choices for this council. Given the fact that we're in the process of updating the comprehensive plan and we'll finish that in 2015, I just wanted to remind the council that we are doing all we can as staff, but you as a council have different authority and options available to you with respect to these different projects.
Oh, sorry, I thought of a different subject. Yep. Do we have any estimates yet? This probably isn't your department as much, but of the impact for the hotel motel tax when all this is completed? I imagine we've got.
No, actually,
Nice funds coming.
we haven't. I have not. I'm looking around for PD Shadar and Ewan, and Ewan shook her head. So
It should be nice for our,
Significant.
yeah, for our
Yeah.
committees that do outreach to get people to come to Renton.
450,
Seems like it's,
over 500 rooms.
Oh, yes, yes, over 500 rooms.
I can't remember what we
All the
currently
times.
have now in Renton, but that'll be like a
I think
nice 50% boost or
the other
something.
thing that's will have an impact because the tax rate, I think, is a percentage of the. it's
Of
not
the
a
cost
flat-
of the room.
It's of the cost of the room. And
Yeah.
and talking to one of the managers of the hotels down in the valley, I says, I heard you got the $200 a night rooms down there. And he said, no, he said, they're $199.90.
Yeah.
You know, and so when they started, those rooms were not at that price.
Oh, no.
And obviously, the 12-story hotel is not going to be $199. I've seen the plans for that baby.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right there. And I think I want to clarify, too, for the public that these hotels, these pieces of property have been zoned for a long time. And they were zoned during a time period when we weren't having anything happening, and so the council at the time, a lot of us before I was here, wanted to do what we could do to get development. And now all of a sudden, there's whole new development coming, and these people have bought the property based on the zoning, so it makes it difficult on staff to not. And we don't expect you to do anything but follow the law and that, but explain that's what's happening. We asked for this development. Nobody anticipated it coming quite this fast. And I know that down on Lake Washington Boulevard, from Garden to Coulon, and I don't know how far past the first entrance to Coulon, they have to either 4-lane it or 5-lane it. They have to add extra lanes when they put in the signal.
It will be a 4-lane roadway, and then when you approach from the north and the south, it may have an additional lane, probably 5 lanes at the intersection itself for additional turning lanes.
At Port Quindale.
Oh, I was talking about
No, I'm
at
talking at Coulon
South,
Park.
the South Coulon Park and
Oh.
at,
That we'll get rid
at
of.
Garden. Yeah, and then when you get up at exit 7, yeah, you've got a 5-lane roadway section again.
So
So then it just bottlenecks down
And then it goes down to 2 lanes, one in each direction
through Kennydale.
through Kennydale, yes.
And the developer has to pay for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The road, the developer is paying for
That'll be the intersection that never gets done, basically. Every time we complete it,
Well,
we
actually,
reopen it.
you know,
The
the
garden.
interesting part about this is the intersections get done when the developer needs it
Yeah.
and pays for it.
Yeah, right.
And, because this, Michael Chris had this in plan for a long time, and he kept talking
Yeah.
about building it, and all of a sudden, it became really important, and now he is building it, so.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
So we are getting some road improvements.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, and I don't know if the residents would want Lake Washington Boulevard 4-laned all the way down.
yeah, I don't think they would.
So I think, you know, if we can take, this is my perception from having to
Yeah.
deal with traffic for many years, is if we take care of the people so they can get in at the ends and don't have to go to the middle,
Yeah,
That'd be nice.
that makes it
so.
better.
yeah.
And then if we could just keep the people from Kent and Auburn and all them other places, Maple Valley, doing bypass
Yeah.
at rush hour, we would, or we could put a toll.
Yeah. And I,
On 30th.
yeah.
Put a toll just for if you're a non-resident, but I'm being facetious. mean,
I guess I do have some comments to share about that. I mean, so I made my kind of wisecrack about that intersection, in part because we redid that Garden, Logan, Lake Washington. Well, we reworked that intersection with the landing, and then the landing's been super successful, so I think we decided we needed to make some upgrades to it. And then our sidewalk improvement to the Highlands kicked in, and then we're in there once again, and then that was why I made this comment, and then we'll do this, and then we'll be back in there. But in a lot of ways, I think we're just experiencing success. I mean, that whole project was, the landing was successful. There's obviously a lot of high energy in that area. I will say that, to me, it strikes me that the more we can do to widen that part of that part of Lake Washington and sort of give people the impression that when you go to these hotels that exit 5 is the exit to get on, to get access. The better favor we'll do for people that live in Kennydale. So we don't want, I mean, that road will be open, but it's possible that this might even in some ways help deter people using Lake Washington as a bypass. The more, the more it's congested on that end, the more people might just decide to bag it and not try driving through there as opposed to using the freeway. So, but in any case, I'm very pleased that the landing is generating so much interest. And I frankly think that this is going to only compound that. When the hotels go in, and then there's a ready clientele for the restaurants, even more clientele, then there'll probably be interest in more of the property around it. So we'll just have to get used to it.
Okay. Well, on behalf of Raquel, Doug, Mark Santos, Johnson, and myself, thank you so much for giving us the time at your last committee of the whole meeting for the year to make these presentations and share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, Committee of the Whole is adjourned, and we'll be back as a full council at 7.